Hey guys, welcome back to The Human Condition. This video is another one in our psychology series, Inside the Mind of Arthur Morgan. Arthur's identity is torn between outlaw loyalty and personal morality. He wrestles with guilt from a violent past, seeking meaning before the...
In this video, I decided to break it down into 7 main psychological schools of thought: physiological, cognitive, behaviorism, psychodynamic, humanistic, sociocultural, and evolutionary, to explain why Arthur does what he does in Red Dead Redemption 2. From his failing body and exhausted brain to the memories that haunt him to habits shaped by bounty payouts and lawmen's bullets, each
Starting off with number 7, evolutionary psychology. This says people do what they do because it's beneficial to their survival. We act, fight, and cooperate to stay alive. And when we apply that lens to Arthur and
we can see that Arthur, in the beginning of the game, is doing what's beneficial to his survival by staying with the gang, because that's all he's ever known.
Number 6, sociocultural. This is, in my opinion, I could be wrong, things outside of our control and people that influence us that aren't in our core group. So these are influences like day-to-day interactions with people and external environment. So in the beginning of the game, this would be like the Pinkertons chasing the gang and interactions with people without who are not in Arthur's core group. So people outside the gang and maybe even people in the gang that Arthur doesn't talk a lot to. Because in my mind, Arthur's core group is mainly just Dutch and Hosea within the gang, and maybe John potentially, but not until later in the game. So in the beginning of the game, we can see why Arthur continues to be in the gang and runs away from the Pinkertons, goes from town to town, and this is because the influence of the Pinkertons causes the gang to move from town to town. And it could potentially later in the game, Arthur's realization that John, even though in the beginning he's kind of mad at John for leaving the gang for a year, that John only did it because he cares about his family and was trying to distance himself because he was struggling with accepting the fact that he was a father, but eventually learns and appreciates that he's a dad, which is pretty wholesome. Earlier in the game, Arthur sees John as not even quite in his core group, but an outside influence. But later, he brings him in the core group and slowly starts moving Dutch out of his core group, but not on purpose, because he has to. Fifth school of thought, humanistic. This is, in my opinion, how people form who people form most of their goals for in life, and this is their core group. So this is the people that adds value to your life, and who you make most of your goals for that aren't your own. So this would be like, and for Arthur in the beginning of the game, this is definitely Hosea and Dutch. However, sadly, later on in the game, he loses Hosea, and Dutch slowly starts to push him away, which strengthens his connection to John. In the early game, most of Arthur's goals he has for himself is for Hosea and Dutch, like being the forcer for the gang and following Dutch's plans and helping Hosea. He now brought John to his core group and sadly had to push Dutch out, causing him to make most of his goals for John, especially for John to go get away from the gang and build his family, which is really nice and really wholesome. In the beginning of the game, it's Hosea and Dutch, in my opinion, but later on, it becomes John. Micah also, if we're talking about Dutch's briefly, Dutch's, I think actually Dutch in the beginning viewed John as a sociocultural influence rather than a humanistic core group, and this is because he ran away and left. I think part of the actual issue throughout the entire game is Dutch really was felt kind of betrayed by John leaving for a year and never really showed it and let it bottle up. And Micah found this out and manipulated this to where Dutch went against John, and Arthur saw this and was like, called him out on it, basically. But Micah doing this kind of pushed, in Dutch's core group, kind of pushed Arthur out with John, leaving Micah the only one in Dutch's core group that he made his goals for, and this is how Micah took over. The fourth one is psychodynamics. This is one's deep emotional states that impact their decisions. This also can be seen by a person's relationship with their parents and caregivers. So with Arthur, we don't know a lot about his parents. However, his dad was also a criminal and a thief, and he didn't get along with his dad, and he remembered his mom very fondly, if I remember correctly. So Arthur's willingness or ability to leave the criminal life when he had to might have actually been influenced by, in a way, definitely not completely, his relationship with his dad, because his dad usually, this is my opinion, people, if they have a good relationship with their parents, they'll take on, more likely to take on their beliefs and decisions, or if they have a bad one, they'll do the exact opposite. So in a way, it didn't make sense that Arthur had a bad relationship but had the same profession, right? But maybe it was because his only choice was to be a criminal, because he was raised by Dutch and taken in by Dutch. But once he had the opportunity, he was finally able to do what he always wanted and live a better life and be very moral and be the exact opposite of the way his dad was, and leave the criminal life when his dad was a criminal because of their bad, strained relationship potentially. Whereas in contrast, this is probably why Dutch couldn't let go, because Dutch's relationship with his dad was very different. Whereas his dad, he looked up to his dad. His mom, he felt like always constricted him. But his dad was more distant, but he looked up to his dad. And his dad fought for freedom in the Union. And Dutch's mom constricted him, which it's a negative relationship in constriction, which compensation, Dutch probably was like, okay, well, from this high level of restriction, I'm going to be completely free, which had made him like against authority, toppled with his dad served his Union and passed away sadly fighting a war for the government, which made this kind of his relationship with his parents. His dad, he might have some resentment that he might blame the government for his dad's passing, and his desire for freedom from his controlling mom, Dutch. He was less willing to let go of the criminal life when he had to. The third school of thought is behavioralism, routines, and habits. Early in the game, Arthur's routine is to be an enforcer to help the gang. Later on, it changes because his view of what he does is, even if it's even worth it, changed. So he slowly started to change his routine to hang out, help John, whereas earlier it was help the gang. The second psychological school of thought is cognitive, the way one thinks and views the world and sees the world through their perception. This can also be schemas, how one views the world. So very important school of thought. So originally, the way Arthur thought is that the gang was a good place for him, beneficial for his survival, his family, and this was all due to his schemas as well, how he viewed the world. And he viewed the world most likely, combining us all together, in my opinion, as a world where one person has to fight for their freedom. Not that actually, a person has to fight to survive, build connections, a desire to break free from the criminal life eventually, but that was like more of a subconscious thought in my opinion. A desire to be moral, have a higher moral code, actually a desire to maintain his already moral code that he believed that Dutch had. Basically all the other schools of thought combined made this schema, but later on his worldviews changed because he got faced with the realization that he won't always be around forever once his health conditions worsened, which forced him to face his own morality and how good of a person he was being. And he started to realize maybe I'm not being the most moral person I can be, toppled with the increasing pressure from the Pinkertons chasing them, toppled with Dutch's moral code decaying, caused forcing Arthur to make a decision whether he was going to be, since Dutch instilled Arthur's moral code, and now Dutch lost this moral code, Arthur's entire worldview switched upside down, in the realization that he won't be around forever, and that the Pinkertons were after them, forced him to make a decision whether he was going to let his moral code decay or strengthen and build his own moral code, not just the moral code Dutch instilled in him and gave him. And he decided to change his worldview from fulfilling Dutch's moral code to building a stronger individual moral code. And viewed the world very differently because of all the other schools of thought. Like his routine started changing, what was beneficial for his own survival started changing. His core group changed. Basically all other psychological school of thought was forced to change, causing Arthur to change, but also because he wanted to change too. And finally, the physiological school of thought, things that are internal, like brain chemicals, health. And this is number one because this often has an impact on all the other schools of thought, in my opinion, because brain chemicals highly impact the way you think. So if you have more brain chemicals or less brain chemicals in a certain way, this will definitely change the way you think, impacting cognitive, behavioralism, psychodynamics, all the schools of thought, in my opinion. So another key, not just brain chemicals, but in all internal aspects, is health. And when Arthur's health went awry, it forced him to face the realization that he won't be around forever, and causing him to maybe brought back that subconscious fear of being like his dad, who was a criminal who he didn't get along with, and the subconscious fear that is he being moral before he leaves, and he maybe thought maybe he wasn't being as moral as he was meant to be and wanted to be a better man. And the moral code he once had was decaying from the very person who gave him inspiration to have that moral code. And this all kind of probably was significantly changed his viewpoint due to his health. His realization of his own not being around forever caused him to want to be moral, probably like at least 60% of the way. The rest of the 40% was just him, or at least 50% of the way. The rest of the 50% was his own decision to be more moral. By the day, Arthur Morgan became a legend, a myth, and became a better man, and passed helping his fellow friend build a strong family. So yeah, pretty wholesome, bittersweet, wholesome ending to the story. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, thanks again for watching. Like, subscribe if you want. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.